Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your participation. So this event is organized by CETEL and the Space Economy Evolution Lab of the Bocconi. Before to start the event, I would like to remember the Professor Andrea Samariva that passed away recently, and that today you should have moderated this side event. Andrea Samariva was the director and the founder of the C-Lab Center that studied the space economy. And we remember him for his contribution to space community regarding this topic, and in particular his studies concerning the space resources on Moon and their potential business uses. So we remember the Professor Samariva for his visionary vision and for studying the space economy, divided the concept around Earth orbit and beyond Earth orbit. So this session, and thank you for all the speakers, analyze the role of the global strategy for scaling up in Earth observation business. And today, our speakers will discuss different aspects regarding this topic, such as the role of supply and demand, the investment in emerging economies, and the role of private capital's international strategy. So in particular, the potential concentration national demand structure with high market barriers puts at risk the competitiveness and the sustainable growth of the space industry. So today we underline two concepts that, in my opinion, is important to highlight. In particular, first of all, the need to reinforce to go global to overcome the demand constraints. And the second aspect is the need to highlight the internationalization strategies to fuel the business growth. So the first speaker, thank you, Mr. Kumar, will analyze the supply side. So we know that recently the launch of mega constellation in LEO orbit by private companies has increased exponentially, targeted the diversification of customer portfolio. So, Mr. Kumar, what do you think of the emergence of the standard services with the low spatial resolution, and does a standardization approach work for customers, and which customer? So,
awesome. Thank you for inviting me here, Clelia. Let me start with, I know when you ask the question, we talk about resolution. So with the new space industry, the way the economy is going, there are constellations being launched first with various spatial resolutions, right? We have Maxar that's launching 30 centimeter class satellites next year. You have a lot of other companies like Satellogic, Planet, launching satellites that are 1 meter, 2 meter. So there is a resolution component all the way from 30 centimeters to 3-5 meters with these constellations. The second one that's also happening is what I call the spectral resolution, the number of bands you have. So on our satellites, we might have 8 spectral bands. Again, mentioning Satellogic, they have around, I believe, 30 plus band in hyperspectral. And then if you look at other traditional satellites, they might have anywhere between 4 to 6 bands. So there's this whole spectral resolution and the amount of data that's being collected for Earth observations. That's the second trend. The third one, which is actually very, very interesting that's happening with LEO constellations, is the temporal dimension. Right now, most of the satellites are in the sun-synchronous orbit, so they come to any place on the planet a couple of times a day. Now we are launching satellites in the mid-inclination, so now we're talking about revisits that can be 10, 15, 20 times a day. And eventually, I think where this industry is going, you can expect a satellite coming almost every hour or more frequent. So I just wanted to touch base on when we talk about these LEO constellations, there are very unique things happening there. The second question I think you're asking about is how do we actually use this data being collected by these multiple constellations and the standards that go with it. And fortunately, I happen to be on the board of Open Geospatial Consortium, where we're actually looking into what can we do to ensure that this data can be accessed easily. So thanks to things like cloud computing, cloud access, all of these data sets, most of them are now available on the cloud. That means a lot of the users want to get their hands on the raw data as well as finished products and services. I'll talk more about that. In terms of the raw data, the industry today, just Maxar is collecting around 80 terabytes a day. And if you add up all the industry, I'm going to say we're close to a petabyte of data. And there is no way human eyes can actually look at this imagery. So there is a need for accessing this data seamlessly. And the users happen to be, a lot of the times, even though I use the word developers, these are the employees of various organizations. The demand signals are coming from defense, they're coming from civil government, they're coming from various commercial companies, mapping companies like Google, Apple. You can also talk about agriculture, insurance. There are several companies that can actually use the data all the way from low resolution to very high resolution. So that's where the demand signal is coming. And what these companies and the developers in these companies are looking for are the APIs that can actually access this data easily. So I would say if you look at most of the companies, including Maxar, we have platforms with APIs that allow easy access to data. This is the raw data. And as I mentioned, there is so much data coming along, very few people can actually have the capabilities to take the data and do the analytics. So there are several AI ML based technologies that are being used to extract information. And this could be change detection from medium resolution satellites, or actually extracting features like field boundaries and then monitoring crops on a regular basis. So there is a demand signal for the medium and low resolution data sets that are being collected almost on a daily basis for the entire planet. And now where the industry is going is, how do you actually not only access the data, but also access the derivatives and the information that is being created from these satellites? And this is where I think there is a lot of, I would say, work right now being done to take the data and create information that's relevant. If you look at the AI ML value chain, the way I describe the 4 steps are, you have a descriptive phase that tells you what's in an image. This is where most of the industry is today. They describe the number of objects in an image. They're looking for specific features. That could be land use, land cover. And then as we progress the value chain, then you're going to the diagnostic. Okay, you saw 20 cars in a parking lot. What does that mean? So you're actually diagnosing what happened. Maybe it could be the COVID. And then you go to what we call predictive. And now you're watching a trend and you start predicting that as the COVID era gets better, there will be more cars in the parking lot. And then eventually prescriptive, where you're actually telling that this is the action the AI ML is recommending. So these are all the services that we are heading to. And at each of the value chain, again, I would go back and say all the markets, defense, civil government, commercial, and in commercial especially, very specific application-oriented companies, agriculture, insurance, and the applications could be various flooding happening. And by the way, I forgot to mention that one of the other trends of the new space is the new modalities like the synthetic aperture radar. This is where, especially when you have the flood events, people are using SAR data to see which areas have been inundated. And once the flood recedes, between some of the spectral bands like shortwave infrared and near infrared, and then using SAR, you can actually predict where the flooding extents were. So when we talk about these modalities, so today what people are trying to do is develop these standards and APIs that they can actually bring into several applications. And then there is the whole discussion about what kind of decision support tools they have. The traditional tools like GIS, which are the tools people use to do the analysis. There are other open source tools that are also coming along to ingest this data. So going back to your question, I believe is that right now the industry has developed standards to basically provide the raw data, and then it's moving into providing these services, which where various global customers in multiple markets are looking for these kinds of services. So back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar, for your point of view and regarding the evolution of the supply side. But regarding the demand side, we know that in particular in Europe, but also in Italy, the overall market is mainly driven by the public demand with a clear difficulty to reach also the commercial one. So in Europe, there is an evident fragmentation of national market and the barriers in exploiting synergies between civil and military use of satellite technologies. So this environment poses difficulties for companies to expand their business beyond national borders. So considering this context, Mr. Molina, which are the conditions to overcome the uncertainty for access to Earth observation data by the commercial demand in Europe or in Italy? So in addition, what are the major barriers to compete at a global level, in your point of view?
Thank you very much, Clelia. Thank you to all the other panelists. What you're saying is extremely correct, not only at Italian level, but also at European level, because we always refer to the typical playground in our activities being Europe as a whole. But if we make a little historical excursus of what has been the evolution of the Earth observation, we started now several years ago with unknown problems, just driven by the technology push, driven by basic research and Earth observation related research. That was meaning that Earth observation was more a mean than the final target. And to some extent, the very same evolution we are following in Italy, where the biggest stimulus we have in Earth observation is coming from a public entity, that is the Italian Space Agency. This is in addition to all the European initiatives, but in Italy in particular, it is the Italian Space Agency that is a research institution in the end, even if now coordinated by the various ministries that have interest in the Earth observation domain, but in the end, it's a research institution that is driving the demand. Now, how to evolve from an Earth observation research, that is what a research body like ASI well understands and when specifies, how to evolve into an operational scheme. Because at that point, the operational scheme is what can size a space infrastructure, that is, for example, a constellation. Italian Space Agency is developing together with us at CITAL, together with other players in Italy, a platform that has one very key application in observation, but in the end, we need to evolve from this research mode to an operational mode. And just following what Kumar was saying, we see three main features to scale up and to make the commercialization possible. The first one is the availability of data. Availability of data means, first of all, that we need to have the space infrastructure. That is, for example, a constellation. But then we will see in a moment that this is not enough, because we can build the most beautiful constellation of platinum satellites, of Maxar satellites, but that is definitely not enough to break the barrier. The second element that we have well learned from Professor Sommariva, that I want to remind here as well together with you, Clelia, is the cost of this. Because again, we will see that the cost means something related with fragmentation. And the third point that is very much linked with the availability of data is the processing. Because as soon as we have more and more data available, it is clear that the only way to process them is going through artificial intelligence. Let's go back to a moment to the point of the cost element, because in the end, this is the most evident barrier for any commercialization being possible. The two cost drivers are, on one side, the way we see it, the awareness we can create in the customers. In this case, the intimacy with customers is key in order to have a basis of customers that is big enough and it is overcoming fragmentation. In this respect, we have to understand that in particular at a local scale, let me call local the national scale that is Italy, but also at continental scale like Europe, for example, in order to overcome this fragmentation, we need to identify key players that can be anchor tenant for a certain vertical of a certain application. But again, this awareness of the customers, that is, we start from customers we are very intimate with, we persuade them, we stimulate the demand. Again, this is not enough, because the most beautiful constellation we can build with, let's say, Italian forces only, need to be interoperable with any other constellation in Europe and worldwide. And this is bringing another important topic, that is the one that on one side can be called, in general, interoperability, but is calling for a strong action about the standardization. Because, as I'm saying, the biggest effort we can put in Italy, in Europe, in the United States, and worldwide for having individual constellations, the only way to scale up the offer, I mean, after we have sized the demand, after we have stimulated the demand and sized it, the only way to scale up the offer is to make collaborative all the possible constellation that we have. And I'm very glad that it was mentioned that we are not speaking only about optical imaging, but in particular optical high resolution, hyper and multispectral, SAR, and thermal infrared. That is all the possible colors of the electromagnetic spectrum in order to have a consistent picture in whatever conditions, day, night, fog, atmospheric events. Now, it is clear that for us, for a company like CITAL that is operating in Italy, the next natural step is going to Europe. But of course, if this effort that is already very much sustained by the institutions, because we don't forget that Copernicus is a remarkable example of constellation existing and that is already providing the available data, that is providing cost-effective data because they are free of charge. But in the end, this is not enough to break the barrier of the commercialization. Let's say that the paradigm evolution, the paradigm shift that we are building together with the national European institutions is to move from a pure need of understanding the world to operational needs. And we do believe that the first step will be really overcoming the fragmentation on the customer side, but the next immediate step will be to overcome the fragmentation on the supply side.
Thank you, Mr. Molina. So, and I would like also to address another topic regarding the investment. So we have talked about the evolution of the trend regarding the satellite operator and the topic regarding the fragmentation, in particular in Europe, regarding the demand in using satellite services. So, and the integration of satellite data into product and business process can lead to economic, environmental, and also social benefit. Considering this potential benefit, Mr. Rossotto, do you think that satellite services can support the resilience of infrastructure assets? So in particular, do you think that the satellite services could support infrastructure investment in emerging economies, maybe lowering environmental or operational risk?
Thank you very much. And indeed, I want to start this intervention remembering Professor Sommariva that I had the chance to meet in Washington, D.C. At the World Bank a few years ago, and he has started advocating the importance of focusing on the economics and the social and global benefits of the space economy and introducing rigor and analytical and academic excellence in this area of work. Indeed, as you said, when we look at the funding of the space economy, we need to think about infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and the data ecosystem. And when we look at digital infrastructure, we have major funders that are funding the core satellite infrastructure, the Earth observation major technologies. Then we have applications and services, and then we have data. And at every layer of the ecosystem, at every layer of the value chain, we have different players, we have different actors that intervene. It's very important to look at basic research, and indeed, as you were saying before, and as also the other speakers and Marco Molina in particular highlighted this point, there is a role for public research, and every major geopolitical actor is focusing considerable efforts in basic research, in what we can call deep tech investment and funding. And in this sense, I think that the European stakeholders, as well as the American stakeholders, as well as India and China and Russia and Brazil, are all contributing to this deep tech research. And then you have also a consideration that this technology can also be dual use technology, and so part of the research is funded by defense, and other is funded by research for dual or civilian use. So also you have several stakeholders at that level. Then when you look at commercialization, and that's where it really becomes interesting, I find that a lot of the players on the state, on the government side, that basically we can say 10, 15 years ago, they would focus on basic research and they would provide funding to large enterprises. Right now, they are going at the level of funding emerging startups, new technologies. So you find this trend all over the globe. So in the space economy, you have American, European, Chinese, Indian venture outputs, outfits out of the public research institutions. And that's also an interesting phenomenon, because I think that when you look at investing in application services and data, you are looking at venture capital investing. But it's a venture capital investing that is further, how can say, stimulated by the presence of actors that are normally in the deep tech funding space. So there is a very good example in India. There's a very good example in the United States of funds that bring together the venture capital side and the research side. When you get to the venture capital side, of course, the criteria for this segment will be the same that any other venture capital industry, from biotech to software to disruptive technologies. So high scalability, high risk, global product. So we cannot think at regional or national products anymore. It's a global scale. You need to think, an entrepreneur in this segment needs to think at global services from day one. Critical infrastructure is a major selling point. And that's where I think emerging markets in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America can provide a lot of very important demand for satellite-based services as well as Earth observation. I think that if we look at roads, if we look at environmental applications, at air quality control in major cities, so urban infrastructure, they can all be powered by satellite technologies, and they can all leverage local ecosystem startups in emerging markets. And that's where we are particularly interested. I think on the World Bank side, there are several programs to help governments further and strengthen the resilience of critical infrastructure, especially urban transport, logistics, ports, and so on. And on the IFC side, we have a practice on telecom, media, and technology, as well a second team that deals with venture capital and funds. And depending on the type of opportunity, I think that we would be quite interested about partnership opportunities in this space. I think this summarizes a bit some of the emerging trends. And back to you, Clelia, for more feedback on these points.
Thank you. Thank you for your point of view. And so regarding instead the topic of the role of international strategy, so the Earth observation can potentially suffer demand concentration risk, so in the national markets, and posing the case for the internationalization strategy. So, Mr. O'Connell, can private capital share the development commercial companies with the reliable business model that target the international demand, and what are the key factors to attract the private capital, or I don't know if there are other solutions also?
Sure, Clelia, thanks very much, and thanks to Isa and Sital and my good friends at SDA Bocconi for inviting me here today. You know, it's no secret that this is one of my favorite topics in the space economy. I've been looking at Earth observation since the mid-1990s and watched it change quite a bit. Most recently, of course, in my role as a director of the Office of Space Commerce at the Department of Commerce, where I was involved in advocacy and even regulatory roles. I have not heard either here or in the larger forum a lot of discussion about effective regulation. But let me come in a minute to the discussion about the finance aspects. I think the path that we have seen Earth observation take is illustrative of a lot of lessons we can learn on the broader space economy, the role of government as a first customer, again, regulatory issues, market competition, and things like that. Very, very important. And so I'll just throw out a couple of thoughts, and I think they've been said already by others about, you know, some of the keys to scaling up. I think there's a natural barrier breaker that's happening right now, in that we're seeing many people not in the space community starting to innovate. I gave congressional testimony here back in late July, and I basically said that this was not unlike we saw in the digital economy evolution, where somebody showed up in the late 1960s or early 1970s and said, hey, I've got a desktop computing capability. You should see how your business changes because of it. And our lives have never been the same. And we're seeing that for space. We're seeing companies who have never been involved with space in the past, because space is so accessible, start to experiment with space. And that'll be a separate wave of innovation than those that are sort of pushed on the supply side by the space community. And the result of that, I think, is going to be, and I said this in the testimony, I think space is actually a key platform, if not the key platform, for all of the innovations that we see, ag tech, clean tech, certainly climate, understanding climate better, things like that for the future. So obviously I'm an optimist here, but we're seeing a larger set of demand coming because of the accessibility of space. Others have mentioned the new phenomenology that are coming in the market. Earth electro-optical and radar are now well understood. We're seeing more spectral activities, thermal, even RF sensing that's going to increase the amount of data that's available and the diversity of data. Key partnerships between providers and customers. I think there's a very important strategic point as to where the data provider stops their service to a customer and where the customer's interest picks up. Does a data provider provide all the analytic products? Do you stop at a certain point and let the expert community using the data actually take advantage of it? It differs by market segment. It differs by phenomenology and others. You know, for those familiar with hyperspectral, historically it was pretty hard to use, needed massive computational power. Now that many of those problems have gone away, but it's still a fairly exotic phenomena for people to work with. And so where will the innovations come from the producer and supplier side of the chain. Lastly, and Marco mentioned it, the entire aspect of the infrastructure associated with it, but also the integrity. We're seeing people bring blockchain into the market. We're seeing a whole variety of cybersecurity. Again, we worked on this at Commerce toward the very end. How are we going to make sure that this data has very high levels of integrity going forward? So let me pivot then and talk for a minute about the space finance issue. It's arguable that the arrival of private finance and the diversity of private finance is one of the most important developments in the space economy over the last few years. And it is the case because it is partly a driver of the commercial practices that we're seeing and in all of these companies coming to the market. So let me just make a few points about this. Number one, we're no longer at a point where there's just random or optimistic investment in space capabilities. There's a much more sophisticated group in the space finance community that understands what it takes to make a successful space business. And as has been said in the broader audience here today, it's not just the technology, it's very much the team's experience, the diversity in the team, understanding the financial model, understanding market competition, and a whole host of other things. And the financial community understands how to think about these things. That's one dimension of it for sure. Second is that governments and the private sector view risk differently. Many government programs have a core program and then an innovation piece that lies at the margin. But companies, private finance can actually carefully assess risk, obviously, in slightly different ways. And they'll also assess risk for various parts of the value chain. So we can assess risk in the business model, in the pricing model, in the financial model, and how people think about competitions. I can assess risk in the team, which experiences are more important than others. And so that's a nice complementary way for government and industry to work together to satisfy a wide range of needs. Lastly, I'd just point to the fact that the space finance community has about as many exciting developments as we're seeing in the space community itself. We're seeing great diversification. Carlo mentioned this. We saw an unprecedented level of venture capital finance in 2020. We would never have thought that sitting here in the middle of 2020, that it would be the best year on record for venture capital. But we've seen the emergence of the SPACs, which have affected the space business. We are also seeing increased interest in private equity. And then we're also talking to people who are looking at some farther out ideas, such as helping companies move from a pre-seed level all the way up to IPO through a different series of financial instruments. We're also talking to people who are thinking about things like a space commodities exchange. And again, things that are a little farther out. So that diversity of activity and better savvy on the part of the space finance community, I think will be an important amount of fuel, pardon the pun, for the space community in years to come. And on that note, I'll stop.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. I don't know if there are questions from the audience, but I have a question for all speakers, so we can follow the same order. Regarding the role of the public policies. So in your opinion, how the public policies can stimulate the development, how can I say, the different innovation ecosystem. So if we think about the European ecosystem or the American ecosystem, the China ecosystem. So in your opinion, do you think that the public policies can play a crucial role for the creation of the competitiveness and the development of this ecosystem? So I don't know, Mr. Kumar, if you want to start.
Absolutely. And I know Kevin is the expert on this, but I'll give my 2 cents. I'm sure Kevin will elaborate more on that. The short answer is absolutely yes. If you look at Maxar, we actually built the whole business from the remote sensing policy that was, I believe, signed by Bill Clinton in 1992. It was actually a very progressive, forward-looking policy that actually enabled especially the electro-optical business. On the same side, we did not have a policy that encouraged radar. So you will see that Europe has really progressed well in radar. Now, due to the changes in the policy in the United States on other modalities, we are now seeing a lot of radar companies popping up. And as Kevin mentioned, the radio occultation, the radio frequency satellites. So there are very interesting policy changes that are going on as we speak. And I'm sure Kevin has more details that are enabling us to, as a commercial industry, to launch satellites quickly while getting the relevant permissions. So I would say policy plays a very key role in this economy.
Okay, thank you. And so to follow the order, Marco. Marco, I think that you are new. Yes, okay.
Yes, I can bring our witness from the Italian point of view. So in the recent history of space activities in Italy, we have seen that the strongest stimulus was arriving from institutional initiatives. Some of them have been really milestones in radar technology, like Cosmos SkyMed, like Cosmos second generation. But this is just the beginning toward commercialization. It is not Cosmo, it is an institutional product. It was mentioned already by Carlo, clearly a dual use product that has a strategic relevance for Italian government. Then the following step, that is this initiative to provide Italy with a multi-mission platform that is called the Platino, that has then been oriented toward the killer application of the Earth observation, is what is allowing on a smaller scale, which means shorter development cycle, more affordable costs in the development and in the recurring of these small satellites in the range 250, 350 kilos. That is paving the way to commercialization, but the initial stimulus is coming from the Italian Space Agency. And of course, a private industry like ours, with our partners, with our other industrial partners, are very grateful to the Italian Space Agency, to the Italian government, because without this initial stimulus, we couldn't have been evolving so fast toward commercialization. So we are really entering in a second age of this Earth observation, at least in Italy. We can recognize that the first one is very much consolidated. It has state-of-the-art products in the SAR domain, but in order to break the barrier of the commercialization, this second wave is really fundamental, and it has been stimulated by Italian Space Agency. Now, the way this will be evolving toward a purely commercial initiative is yet to come, and we are observing it because we do believe that to some extent we will need the anchor tenancy of the government itself, that will be one of the customers, but not the only customer. This will be really the game changer, and at that point the dilution of the public investment, of the public initiative, will really gently bring us to the full commercialization and to the full market, let's say.
Thank you, Marco. So in your opinion, Carlo, what do you think about this thing?
I think it's a very good question. I mean, you asked about the public policies, and indeed, I also think that public policies can do play a major role. And Skumar has indicated, for example, remote sensing policies have a big impact in this segment. I would add, for example, cybersecurity could be a very important stimulus. And I see all governments very, very active on this topic of cybersecurity. Having a national policy of protection of critical infrastructure and then mandating it. And I see United States, Italy, they have done really very good policies in this area of protection of critical infrastructure. And when you look at large countries, when you look at emerging markets, applying those policies will require a lot of technologies that are able to look at the territory in an emerging market with all possible technologies and tools. Then I think, as I was saying before, the state as a financier, and there is all of the different nuances, the defense and the civilian, and how the state can intervene in this area. I think that when we look at data, also open access policies and open API policies can also play a major role. I work in a lot of emerging markets where the open access and open data policies are not there, and they are missing a lot of business opportunities, starting with the mobile sector, but then in area of satellite even more. So basically having an open access policy at national level is very important. And I think countries like India and Brazil are doing very well. They are thinking about protecting their data, but also making them available in an exploitable way so that you can create startups and enterprises in this space. And finally, let's remember that to commercialize, at the end, you will need to have a viable, scalable, and potentially global business. And so the whole ecosystem and policies to help venture capital is very conducive. So being in a country like the United States or India that have very proactive policies to help startups is very important. I think what Europe is doing in France, in Italy, with the bank guarantees is also very good policy and program to help tech companies in this space.
Thank you, Carlo. So, Mr. O'Connell, what do you think?
Sure, thanks, Claudia. And obviously, national policies are very important in this regard. You know, there's largely been continuity in U.S. space policy, and there will continue to be. I think one of the differences that we had was that we did raise the gain, if you will, of commercial activity, the importance of commercial activity as it takes on roughly 80% of the global space market. And so you'd be crazy not to have acknowledged it that way. But I think policies can be done at other levels as well. In the United States, we're actually working with a number of states that are not traditional space states, trying to help them think about how they participate in the space economy. And that's everything from tax incentives to the talent piece. You've heard me talk about this before. Sometimes we're tempted to think that the only talent we need for the space economy is the technical talent, but we actually need a wide range of diverse talent for people to participate in the space economy. You know, everything from the arts and business and law and economics and all sorts of other things. And so at the local level, people can encourage training and education for things like that. Final point I'm making, this Carlo just hit on a very important point, which is there's a bit of a balancing act here. You know, how much data will be made available for free and how much data will be protected, if you will, for commercial advantage. It's a hard question. It's contextual. You know, we've seen this for many years in the Earth observation business. And so government sometimes is tempted to think, I want to leverage commercial capabilities, but I want them to only do the things I want them to do. That's not a commercial market. And on the other hand, if they weigh in too heavily, they'll wind up not actually encouraging a scalable business, as Carlo has pointed out. It's a bit of a balancing act, and it takes some nuanced thinking about very specific kinds, in our case, of Earth observation activities.
Okay, thank you. So we discussed about the role of the public policies in order to develop the different ecosystem. We talk about the example of Italy, or Carlo mentioned before the example of India or Brazil in order to create the startup, for example. But now we are assisting the rise of the competition on the private actor in order to produce, in particular, the constellation of small satellites. So there is a rise of competition, but also different problem. So, but in your opinion, do you think that in the future we will assist a more cooperative or competitive approach among the different ecosystem? So, and the role also that the private actors that are playing, in particular on the topic of small satellite constellation. So the question is, we will assist in the future more a cooperative or competitive approach?
So I will jump in. The answer, it's a new word we use here in the United States called co-opetition. We will cooperate, we will compete. That's how the industry is going to evolve. Kevin mentioned SPAC. You will notice that in the AIS database region, Spire went public, and then they bought a company out of Canada so that they can start growing. So there will be a consolidation of the industry. So if you can call that cooperation, that's one thing that's going to happen. Companies like Maxar and others, we always know the value of other data sets, whether it is medium or low resolution electro-optical imagery or radar imagery or others. So there will be partnerships where each of these different modalities will come together to provide a comprehensive solution to the end users. The last point is in the past, the way the industry was small, so if I use the word IMINT was seen as its own little pipe, stovepipe, so did radar, SIGINT, and so on. At the end, what customers are looking for is multi-INT. So we will see a lot of cooperation, but there will also be competition as we speak.
Marco.
I agree with Kumar, even if, as I was saying in the first intervention I provided, the interoperability of the systems is also a key to ensure more added value to all of them considered as a whole rather than the summation of individual assets. Now, the scaling of the space industry is also a fact, but we need to understand, and this is more a question for people from the finance world, whether the evolution that we have already seen in the only other domain of space activity, that is telecommunication, is really applicable to Earth observation or not. Because in case the telecom paradigm is going to apply, then the answer is competition. In that case, competition and the emergence of few big players worldwide. I'm not sure, but again, this is more a question for people from the economic and financial world, whether the telecommunication paradigm would apply to Earth observation, where the need is not as well defined as it was the telecom since the beginning, where the main need was broadcasting. Now, broadcasting and connectivity. Now, the blend of Earth observation added values are much more diversified than what happened in telecommunication, in which case, really a combination, in the end, I tend to agree with what Kumar said, a combination of competition and collaboration is going to emerge. We have also to consider that the cooperation, the collaborative effort in the telecommunication case is not allowing really added values to the service. It looks like a more applicable paradigm is the one of the international cooperation, for example, in the International Space Station. That is something that by individual effort could not have been made. But I really would like to get the feedback from our two panelists, because it is an interesting discussion. Thank you.
It's a very interesting question, and maybe it brings us back to the data. And basically, usually when you think about the data, there is private data, there is data that is of commercial nature, and then there is public data, and then on public data you have open APIs. Here, it's a three-layer. So you have the private commercial, you have the public, where you can have open APIs, and then you have strategic and sort of defense and strategic data. So here the data is at three layers: strategic, private commercial, public open API. So basically, if you think about competition, I think that at strategic level, there will be some rules of the game that are being agreed at government level, and they will basically follow more non-commercial and strategic considerations. At private level, it will be a kind of competition where basically you need to achieve scale and you need to be big, and there will be agreements between state and larger corporations as well as new players, and I can see very much these dynamics. And then on the venture capital and on the commercial and services and application, it will be highly competitive, and it will be basically really an open market where new ventures will constantly seek capital, and that's how I would see it. So basically, if you follow the nature of the data, I think you find much of the answer to this question.
Thank you, Carlo.
So I think what we're all saying in some ways is that what space is becoming, and we'll come down to the Earth observation issue in a minute, space is becoming a normal market. And space people don't like to hear that because it means it implies that they're not special, but in fact they are special. And it's becoming a normal market in which you will see a slate of non-commercial activities. In the Earth observation business, governments will continue to share data on a non-economic basis, a non-commercial basis that will affect the market. There's no doubt about it. But you'll also see a wide range of other activities. You'll see successful companies, you'll see companies fail, you'll see merger and acquisition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think Marco has asked a really good question on the extent to which the telecommunications market will apply here. I don't think any of us has the answer to that because it is a much more diverse market in many, many different ways. And we see demand growing in a much more diverse set of ways. But I think if we think about it in market terms and recognize that for Earth observation, there'll be some level of activities. I think this is not unlike the weather business. Will there be some level of activities that in market terms will be considered non-commercial, non-economic based, then that's the way we will see both cooperation and competition emerge.
So thank you. I see a question from the audience. So in your opinion, few words, because I know that the time is running. In your point of view, which are the limits to scaling up? In few words.
I believe from a technology perspective, I think most of the barriers are gone. And there are new technologies coming on to actually enable the entire growth. It goes back to some of the topics we discussed, policies, and then international cooperation. I think those will be the key areas that will impact the future growth.
I think I agree definitely on the international cooperation will allow scaling up. I do also see the need of having a marketplace that is going to be without barriers to some extent. So, and in this case, the same regulatory effort that has been put in other space activities may be needed for the Earth observation domain as well.
I think it's very important to eliminate unnecessary entry barriers. So the state will always have certain prerogatives on this market, but often, and I talk about emerging markets, there are barriers that shouldn't be there. And so I think that very much on our side, we work upstream. We look at the good models like India or Brazil, and then we try to advise the others, okay, don't create entry barriers where there shouldn't.
I think the key difference here will be differentiation. We're seeing so many different areas where companies can differentiate either by using multiple phenomenology, becoming expert in the analysis of those, for very specific reasons, or even the security and integrity piece that we talked about. So much of this depends on the integrity of data, because increasingly businesses and governments are making more and more important decisions on the basis of them. And obviously we have a rich history in Earth observation of very important decisions made on the basis of Earth observation, but we're seeing more and more people do that. So how companies differentiate, I think, will be a key factor in the extent to which their businesses will be scalable. There are obviously non-market barriers in a lot of countries that have to be overcome, but I think showing the capability and differentiating is key to success there.
Okay, we have 5 minutes also, and I would like to address this final question that is very interesting. What is, in your opinion, the main bottleneck that can prevent the scalability of small, medium-sized companies in Earth observation globally? Is there growth capital? Is there commercial demand to leverage on? So we can follow the same order.
I would say that there is a possibility, and I'm going to just touch upon what Kevin mentioned before, is the private investment. There are several avenues that are enabling that, and there is the demand signal on the other side. And for some areas, we have to prove that, but in general, the demand signal is there. The second one is even going back to the public policies. Several of our, let's say this is very specific to the United States, several of our military agencies have created something like quick testing of the technologies, AFWorks, SoftWorks, and there are several of them that are enabling these companies to quickly demonstrate. And even even if they're at the conceptual level, there are opportunities being promoted using public programs. So I would say yes, and I'm not aware of what's going on in Europe. I follow UK a little bit, and I see similar trends happening in UK.
I would say that the biggest barrier we see access to credit, because the need of scaling up is requiring, in particular for the upstream, very intensive investments. And again, this is even if it was said that this is going to become a normal market, it is not yet a normal market. So this very capital intensive activities that is building satellites is really bringing an important issue in access to credit.
I also agree. I think the commercial demand is there. So definitely we are going towards a normal market, commercial market, where mergers, acquisitions, growth capital will be available. There may be issues in some of the domestic banking sectors that may be less inclined to fund this type of activity. So I think I spoke before about the bank guarantees in Europe, because for me, the banking system in Europe is still centered on banks and has less of a venture capital scene compared to the United States or the UK or India or other markets. So it's important that the type of access to capital is there. Equally important is basically this fast, as Kumar was saying, this fast testing. I mean, in Silicon Valley, they say fail fast. So basically, there is also the risk that if you put a lot of public funding, companies will drag on and will not test a commercial activity. So I would be very careful not to overemphasize public funding and to have this rapid testing where you can quickly test the commercial appeal of an application, fail fast, and move on. And I think that that's a good lesson that we are getting, especially from US venture capital scene.
Yeah, I would agree fully with that. I mean, what we're seeing, you know, partly based on the almost on-demand launch situation and the CubeSat revolution, if I can just pick two of those, you know, we're seeing an entrepreneur's ability to try something. If it doesn't work, try it again in a short period of time. That's lowering the capital costs associated with innovation. And we have at least in the United States, we have a rich space finance community that is watching those developments very, very carefully. So Carlo is right. The government investment has a very important role, and the government investment has improved with these, I'll call it planting a lot of seeds in things like SpaceWorks and AFWorks, and even NASA has some of these things. But the government wants to have an appropriate role as a customer in a truly commercial market. That's the optimum outcome. And so this ability to innovate very, very quickly at modest costs is really driving this forward.
So thank you. I think that the time is over, and I hope that the discussion has stimulated your thoughts, and we will remain able to continue the discussion also in other occasions. I thank all the speakers for their interesting contribution. And so have a nice evening. Thank you very much.